but it's still Encuentro Cinco. And to our panel tonight on social movements and electoral politics. Before we get started, there was someone wanted to make an announcement?
Yes. A week from today, next Saturday, July 7th, there's going to be a Mass Bay Co-op Fair where co-ops from all over the area will be setting up tables and talking about what they do, and we're inviting the public to come and visit with them and see how they work. There'll be all kinds of co-ops. We're going to have, I think, more than 30 different co-ops come and participate. And if you have a place to put up a little poster like this, then I'll be glad to give you one of these, and you can post it somewhere. As I said, it's next Saturday, July 7th, between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. in next to Harvest in Central Square, Cambridge, and it should be a good event.
All right, thanks. So again, welcome everyone. This is to this informal roundtable discussion on the relationship between social movements of various kinds and electoral politics. We have a really interesting and fabulous panel. I'm really interested to hear what people have to say. I think they're going to be in conversation with each other, given what they've told me what they're going to say. I'm going to assume that you've read their bios. I'm not going to waste time reading them to you again. But as we go, I will introduce them to you as we go along. And each person is going to speak for 5 to 6 minutes, something like that. And then we'll open up to a broader discussion, conversation, hear what you all have to say as well. We'll have a really good interactive discussion about these really important political issues. So first up is someone I think we all know, is Suren Moodliar, who is a founder and a coordinator of Encuentro Cinco. And he's all the way down there in the end, and he's going to start us off.
So this is an exciting topic, and I'm afraid I'm going to be a bit of a wet blanket right at the start and leave things up to everyone else to raise one's spirits. Having said that, I'm also sort of working according to that old motto, pessimism of theory, optimism of will. In other words, I'd like to look at things as coldly as possible, recognizing that there's massive room open for people to make different realities happen, if not because there's a clear theoretical pathway for them, but because of their will and their innovation in the heat of the moment. So, having said that, let's go a little bit further. Elections of late, especially in this country but elsewhere, have been really unkind to the left. And this is especially the case where hopes have been raised by social movements, especially vigorous social movements. And also, in addition to the existence of vigorous social movements, polling that indicates majority support for most of the positions that the left traditionally advocates. So you have this dramatic contrast between, on the one hand, election outcomes, plebiscite outcomes, and the will of the people, and also, in addition to the will of the people, their manifest activity in the streets. So as one goes down the list, right, in Wisconsin, pro-trade union forces are beaten back by a major assault during a recall battle that they initiated. In Egypt, you know, the home of the Arab Spring in some ways, in most ways, the presidential runoffs end up being between, on the one hand, an Islamist, and on the other hand, a representative of the old government, and the Islamist wins. In other words, progressive secular forces do not come to the fore in these elections. Similarly, in France, where the hopes of the left were raised by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, where he went down twice in first-round elections, one in the presidential elections and then again in the elections for the assembly. And so what was so striking about that election was that not only were there vigorous social movements in the last few years leading up to that election, but also, in general, a more moderate faction of the left was able to prevail. And we use that word, the left, advisedly there. In Mexico, coming up in this round of elections this weekend, it's likely that the representative of the old regime will win that election, despite, again, a very vigorous student movement. And then, of course, in Greece, the left is able to come in second and to achieve historic highs, but yet, it did not win. So the question is this: how is it possible that, given majority support for left-wing positions, given the vigorous social movements, the left has not prevailed in elections? And these outcomes are even more striking when we recognize that the system is in tremendous crisis. Not only is it unable to meet its own economic objectives, but it cannot address more fundamental questions around the environment and around the welfare of people. So given the system being in crisis, the existence of social movements, and majority opinion for the left, how is it we're not able to prevail? And I would argue that, and I'll sort of just skip ahead here, that this is largely a result of the fact that the post-World War II compromise, at least in industrial democracies, that the post-World War II compromise, which allowed both capitalism and elections to coexist, capitalism and democracy, that has largely ran its course in the 80s, and right now the battle is really about recovering the democratic space, so that elections that have happened have very little to do with democracy, and as a result the social movements are better able to capture the will and the interests of people, and therefore able to move society ahead, either pulling the entire political spectrum to the left or in other directions, and that's worth thinking about. To sort of just wrap this up, what are the areas that need to be recaptured as we think about social movements and democracy, and the fact that elections no longer correspond to democracy? In Mexico, the youth movement there has targeted the media as an important space that needs being recovered, right? And so it suggests that there's a whole contest around the media that we need to work out. In Greece itself, Syriza made true proportionality an important part of their election platform. So the fact that making the demand that we make every vote count is also an area in which both political parties and social movements can overlap and see their interests as being identical. In Wisconsin, too, the Liberty Tree Foundation for Democratic Revolution has talked about voter suppression being a major issue. And when we think about what's happening in Florida and other places, again, this issue of recovering democracy, creating a democratic space becomes an important topic. And finally, with Syriza, we saw that in their contest of the elections, an issue that became central was, well, what is the role of the rest of Europe? How can we democratize the rest of Europe? In fact, Greece itself cannot win a democratic election without it being a more continental kind of struggle. And so then the question is, clearly political parties are not successful at coordinating across borders. Can social movements be successful at coordinating across borders? And an interesting clue is the fact that the forces in Syriza come out of the European Social Forum and the Greek Social Forum, which are continental kinds of experiences or global experiences. So, I don't know, have I run out of time? First, okay. So just to wrap this up really quickly, I think that social movements can recover political space that political parties competing in traditional elections cannot. And so I'll leave it at that. The big exception to this whole rule is what's been happening in Latin America, and perhaps someone else will take that up.
Great, thanks. Our next speaker is Monica Poole, who is Assistant Professor of History and Social Sciences at Bunker Hill Community College, where she teaches history, philosophy, and ethical hacking, and directs a program in the performing arts.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to be here, and I am sorry to know that we won't be here much longer. So thank you for inviting me before that chapter closes. I should speak louder. Yes. Okay. So far, all I've said is thank you. I think we can all agree that there's a lack of faith in the machine of electoral politics. And our social movements have made this all the more obvious, from Occupy to the New Economy movement to the cooperative movement and beyond. But the question is, what can our social movements do in relation to electoral politics? What I usually talk about with people is history. I'm a historian by trade, so the last 400 years are quite new to me. In the first modern revolution in the 17th century in England, a civil war broke out in the middle of an economic crisis. And what made the English Civil War a revolution was the people who were neither conservatives standing with the king nor moderate reformers standing with the parliament, but were part of a third radical group, and they came up with crazy ideas, like universal suffrage. Many of them couldn't vote, and they all believed that elections were preposterous, because they kind of were at the time. When your all-powerful landlord says, we're having an election, go stand on that hill, and then he counts all the people on that hill and concludes that your village has unanimously voted for, surprise, his son, you kind of lose faith in the power of representation. So this radical group had some changes that they wanted to put forward. And what they did was they decided what they wanted. They purged the parliament, saying, you get to come in, you're radical enough, you stay out, you're probably not going to do our bidding. And they used it as an instrument, as a tool, to get what they wanted to get done. They executed the king, and they experimented with a series of governments and systems of taxation and land ownership a bit closer to democracy than anything the West had seen in hundreds of years. And most of these were made legitimate by the legislative stamp of approval. Now, I'm not advocating that we conduct a purge of our legislative body and keep only the ones that we want and browbeat them until they agree. I prefer a little bit more elegance than that. But I would advocate that the English Revolution understood that the legislative body was a tool for legitimacy. And I believe that electoral politics is mostly useful as a tool for specific purposes to be used to help build and legitimate a structure already being built outside of electoral politics. But what is that structure? Like many of us, I believe that industrial capitalism has outlived its time. Or maybe it's just taken us back in time. Under capitalism, we've suffered crisis after crisis, and we've seen the concentration of wealth expand to a feudal degree. 1% of people owning half the investment capital is quite medieval, and this is not a system for the 21st century. This is a systemic problem. It requires a solution, and we've lost faith in the solutions that electoral processes can offer us. But we can still find our own solutions, and we can use market forces to solve real social problems at the local level. The solution is redefining profit so that capital is subordinate to labor, and so that productivity works to the benefit of humanity, so that we can have some of that free market style innovation that can be stifled by planning, but so that we can still create an environment where people have the room to innovate. At Dewey Square, I tried to document the General Assemblies and meetings and conversations, because I believe in documents and books. And maybe this time we can do as the book says. Maybe the workers can control the means of production. Because we're already doing it. There are 130 million people involved in cooperatives and credit unions in the U.S. There are 11,000 worker-owned companies in the U.S. owned by 13 million people. I draw a lot of hope from the Cleveland model, which offers us an exemplar of the power of cooperatives. It's an integrated complex of community and worker-owned cooperative enterprises targeted to the purchasing power of nonprofit anchor institutions, such as the Cleveland Clinic and Case Western Reserve University. This emphasis on connecting worker-owned firms to nonprofits that are anchored to the geographical area addresses another challenge that faces cooperatives. They might be participatory and internally demographic, but it's hard to be a good company in this marketplace. You might have to expand or pollute or cut corners to sustain yourself and compete. By relying on the anchor institutions and their purchasing power of millions per year, Cleveland's cooperatives maintain some stability and they undercut some of the problems of traditional markets. But you don't totally get rid of the market. As Garl Perovitz has indicated, if you do that, you can create a problem where the market is so stable and so guaranteed that there's no incentive to innovate. You still have a market for innovation, and you can still make it so that profit isn't insular. There's no structural reason why a worker cooperative would be more likely to profit a community than any other business would. After all, you can still be driven by profit to the shareholders. The shareholders are just workers now. It doesn't keep you from being selfish. It helps the workers because they happen to be members of the community, but there's not a larger community vision. But the worker-owned companies in Cleveland are linked to a nonprofit community benefiting corporation. The co-ops return 10% of their profits to a revolving fund, part of which is used for the community. Otherwise, they're independently run worker-owned companies, except they can't be sold without the agreement of the community organization. The jobs will remain in the community and they won't leave. They won't move to China where work is cheaper, and they won't move to the suburbs where land is cheaper. They're intentional and they're rooted, and they work. It's called the Cleveland model because it's being looked at as a model for co-op networks in other cities. If we look to worker ownership as a solution to the problem, and if we look at electoral politics as a tool to effect that solution, we find that there are already some steps toward this. Senator Sherrod Brown is developing legislation to support worker-owned strategies like Cleveland and other cities. Representative Chaka Fattah has supported a bill for a larger scale idea, the National Cooperative Development Act, which allocates federal funds to advance cooperative economic development in depressed areas. But we still need bigger categorical changes. Fattah and Brown are working to incentivize worker ownership development, but there's a bigger problem. What is worker ownership? We need a way of doing business where workers are owners, where labor supersedes capital, and where the spiritual and economic profit of the community is in line with individual selfish profit-driven interests. But there isn't a legal structure and there isn't language for this subordinate profit way of organizing capital and labor. I've heard the language not-for-profit as opposed to non-profit, but that has some problems of precision, like the fact that I had to just say as opposed to non-profit when I'm trying to explain it. Cooperatives can resort to twinning an LLC and a non-profit corporation and artificially divide the business into two in order to function in a system that's built for shareholder profit-driven ownership and built for a system that's privileging capital beyond labor. But this doesn't work. Doing two businesses for the cost of one is an inefficient solution to a systemic problem. Private property and profit at all costs have been the benchmarks of our society for 400 years, which is at once a very short and a very long time. We need some alternatives, and we need to pioneer them and decide on them before electoral and legal structures are then used to solidify them. We can draw some inspiration from the free software movement and the GNU General Public License. We can draw some inspiration from the newfound benefit corporations, sometimes called B Corps. These are some of the institutional and legal changes that electoral politics can help us put into place. But I don't know what all of them are, and I don't think that collectively we all know what they are yet. I think we're at a really exciting moment of experimentation. But we're actually doing the work now to build some truly democratic alternatives, alternatives to both planning and profit. And once we do the work of figuring out what these alternatives are, our elected representatives can be one of the tools we use to help us build a new structure. We've lost faith in the American political process, and some of us never had it. But I'm more excited about electoral politics now than I was since I was 13, because we can look at this in a new way. We can look at the system as a tool to advance our movement, because we're already building what we need. We're not hoping for a sort of leader that's a savior. They're looking for fresh ideas, they're looking for fresh language, and the new economy movement, the cooperative movement, Occupy, we're able to offer a healthier future for our economy and our community. They won't build it for us. Indeed, few will understand the depths of the ideas and the people beyond our movement. But if we play electoral politics right, we can maybe employ it as part of the tools we need for the structure that we're building now.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jeff Juris, who is Associate Professor of Anthropology in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Northeastern University.
Thanks. I've also been an activist for a while, so I think I'll talk using that hat, more so than my academic hat. Can people hear me? Okay. All right, so the way this discussion came together, if I remember in my old age, I'm starting to forget, we had a Facebook conversation after the first Greek elections when the Greek leftist party took power, and the leader had ties to the European Social Forum, and Suren mentioned that. And there was one of these great debates about what does that mean in terms of the social forum. Do people know what the social forum is? I assume you do, right? Okay, good. I won't repeat that. But if you recall, the forum has this idea of an open space, right? So it's an open space for diverse movements and groups, civil society associations, to come together, to plan, to coordinate, and to take your movements forward. And there's been a wide-ranging debate that's sort of lately coming around to the idea that maybe the forum has hit its limit. Maybe we need to do something more. Maybe we need to build a party. Maybe we need revolution. Maybe we need electoral politics. And some of these debates I think are pretty familiar from the Occupy movement. In fact, I think they're debates that get reproduced over and over again in every single movement. And I think it's good. I think we need to address these issues. So in any event, on the Facebook page, there were some of us who were saying that this, if I recall, I'm probably misrepresenting, but this demonstrates the need for the forum to engage with electoral politics. You see, you can actually have an impact. We can get a leftist party elected, although they weren't able to form a government, and now Greece is sort of back in this way of Germany and austerity. Nonetheless, there was some kind of impact. Others of us said, well, no, what this really proves is that the forum is a great open space, that it's an autonomous space where social movements can organize amongst ourselves, yet people who are sort of inclined toward electoral politics can use the forum and can use the energy that's generated there and the visibility to advance that agenda. And so that's kind of the point I wanted to make tonight. I was hoping that we wouldn't get into another debate about the system is corrupt, there's no way we can make change, it's inherently loaded against us, or we need to engage in electoral politics and all this autonomous organizing is a waste of time. I think too often we fall back into that debate, and I think strategically the question is, how can we sit with the tension? The fact is, as Suren was talking about, there's not much sort of transformational change that seems to be able to happen through electoral politics. That's the case. Electoral politics wastes a lot of our time. We get really excited, and then we get upset, and then we get depressed. It takes work away from local communities. It takes work away from real structural change. And that's the case. And I think a lot of us have experience with that. On the other hand, it's also the case that changes that come through the electoral system make a real difference in people's everyday lives. If you have access to healthcare today and you didn't have it yesterday, that makes a difference. If your student loan is going to continue at 3% and not go up to 7%, the interest rate, that makes a difference. And that's also true. And so I think that the strategic key, maybe it's a psychological issue, is how can we sit with that tension? How can we say it's not one or the other? They're both true at the same time. It's both and. And given that, how can we work together collaboratively, strategically, to figure out how to move forward? And so that's the kind of discussion that I'd like to have here, and I'd love to hear what everybody thinks. I talk about this as dual politics, the way that social movements do both and. We organize in our autonomous spaces. We create assemblies. We do prefigurative politics. We create a vision of the world that we want to see in the here and now. Sometimes we do it better than at other times, right? But at the same time, while doing that, we're also bringing visibility to real issues that affect real people, whether it's inequality, unemployment, racism, debt. These are all issues that can and need to be addressed also through the electoral system. And we do both things at once. And I think Occupy was a great example of that. We were building our own autonomous prefigurative world to some extent. It was, some moments better than at others, but that was the idea. We don't need to get into all the details. But that's the case in every movement that I've ever been a part of. This is nothing new. But at the same time, we brought visibility to a lot of different issues that we sort of summarize under the banner of inequality. And that actually changed and helped to shift the electoral discussion. What's going to happen going forward is unclear. But the idea is that movements are symbolic messages that bring visibility to issues and help to change the discussion, while at the same time we're engaging in our own autonomous politics. And the extent to which we can do both of those at the same time, and I think that's what Monica was getting at, I think we can be effective. So I guess the one tricky question, I guess, so for me personally, I'm not one for sort of being too involved in electoral campaigns, although I support some, and I think it's important that people do that. I think it's important for me and a lot of us to have a presence outside of the electoral sphere. But so for Occupy, for example, to what extent can we use the fact that we're in an electoral year, not to get sucked up into any particular campaign, whether it's the Obama campaign or otherwise, but how can we use the issues that are being raised to sort of engage in a kind of symbolic politics, even as we continue to sort of try to build our own world outside of the electoral system. So I'm hoping that some people have some ideas about that, and I'd like to talk about it. So I'll just stop there.
Great, thanks. Our next speaker is Sarah Francis, who is currently working in film and television production in the Boston, New York City area, and is experimenting as we speak at this very moment,
As we speak.
with building a Occupy Boston radio station.
So we are actually maybe live right at the moment. You never know. As I said, we are building and experimenting. So when Suren asked me if I'd like to do this, I thought, yes, this would be great, and it would be great to do this from a media perspective and from an Occupy perspective, since I've been involved with Occupy for a while. And for me, what this was about was sort of doing a lot of research about what electoral politics and social movements mean and where they come from and where we're sort of going and where Occupy took them to in the last 6 months. And it's fascinating to me. And I think it should be fascinating to everyone out here, because I think Occupy did an amazing thing in the fact that it woke up young people. Take a look around this room. How many young people do we see here? It woke up young people and got them out into the streets and made them more aware of what we were doing politically. And that's an important thing. And I think it's also an important thing that we got so caught up in this, what is Occupy, and what is Occupy politically? And those are much too difficult questions to ask when something is so young and so fresh, and a hard place to sort of go and take so many people who have a large diversity of views. So for me, what it was interesting to take a look and see what kind of effect that we've had across the spectrum. How many different websites have been started? How many different dialogues have begun? How many different ways have we sort of sparked fires under things through a social movement that is having effects, is having an effect on politics? I know it's been brought up that the Tea Party has had a much larger effect on politics. Well, they should have. They were much better organized, they were much better funded, and they knew what they wanted to do. And the difference is Occupy came together and said, well, we do understand what we don't want. And we'd like to decide as a group and as a fellowship what we do want. And that's going to take a long time, and it's going to take a lot of conversation, which isn't for everyone, and does sort of, it cuts off a huge section of people who say, let's get out on the streets and change our legislation now. Let's change our politics now. So for me, I agree with Jeff that this isn't a isn't a one or the other sort of conversation. This is a conversation to start talking about how do we work together? How do we sort of benefit one another within a political system and social movements moving alongside, because they always have. And then to add into that, how do we use our media these days to get young people involved in all of this so that they can have ownership of their politics? Because I think that Occupy gave people a chance to get up off their couches and stop making politics a joke, stop making it a joke, and start making it a reality as part of their lives. Also, recently I was in a restaurant and I was sitting near, some middle class, 50-year-old people, and they're sitting there talking about Occupy. They've got jobs, they've got kids, they've got, it. And they said, Occupy gave us the chance to be courageous enough to stand up and say, no more. And a lot of people felt that way. So to have a social movement allows us to have a spark and a flame and to give people hope and to start the conversations that we can't have within our political structure at the present moment. But I definitely don't think that they should be separated. And I don't think that the argument should continue about which one is more valuable. And that is one of the issues that I've had within Occupy, because I believe in politics. I believe in changing it from the inside. But that's just my point of view. And within a social movement, luckily, you can have many different points of view, and that keeps the conversation flowing. As to the media, we need to get out there and keep this media flowing that's happening. It's so exciting to me that young people are getting out there, by themselves and having these conversations, whether it be over Twitter, whether it be in Facebook, talking about open forums, whether it's starting their own blogs. And I suggest people put in Occupy and blog and see how many of them show up. And it gives you a bit of hope that people want to have a dialogue of all different kinds. And they do want to change their political system. They're just not sure how, and in some ways, they're not sure if it's worth it. And so that needs to be a conversation that we definitely need to have. That's right.
Great, thanks. You can applaud if you'd like. We have one more speaker. You will finish speaking. We'll applaud everyone all together. Our last speaker is Thomas Ponniah, who is a member of the Network Institute for Global Democratization, which is one of the founding organizations of the International Council of the World Socialist Forum.
Thank you. And I apologize for being late. Okay, so how do I want to start this? I guess the question that concerns me is why have social movements been so ineffective? That's the question that concerns me. And I want to quickly talk about 3 social movements and then get into this. Now, when I bring up this question, I want to clarify that I have a great deal of respect for the work that social movements do. I engage as well politically. And I see how much effort we put a ton of effort into things, but then you have to look at the end of it, what's the end result? It can't just be about, wow, that felt really great, that was really moving, etc., right? And it can't just be also about, we can't also evaluate a social movement, I think, in terms of how much writing is done about the movement. I mean, if you were to look at the Occupy movement, just in terms of writing, it's as if the French Revolution occurred again. But it didn't. That's the thing that we have to be clear on, right? It's just that we're in a society where we write about everything, and a 6-week movement, we write about it for the next 46 weeks. That's the truth of it. Okay, so let's look quickly at 3 movements. And also I want to quickly say that I really respect the views of the people who've come here, and I respect their activism, and I've known some of you for quite a while, and I've seen a lot of fantastic activism. So even if I disagree, it's a disagreement among friends, among allies. Okay? Okay, so first of all, 3 movements to quickly talk about. One is the Arab Spring. Arab Spring, an incredible movement, the most powerful movement, I think, of the last couple of years, toppling regimes all throughout the Middle East, focused on giving people the vote, giving people the chance to democratically elect their leadership. Right? An incredible thing in the Arab world, I think. A significant achievement. Second, the Occupy movement, which, of course, while also a progressive movement, meaning a movement also committed to various forms of equality, political, economic, cultural equality, as opposed to the right, which tends to be more committed to maintaining hierarchies. The Occupy movement, also an incredible movement, garnering incredible media attention, interestingly with very different goals from the Arab Spring. The Occupy movement's point was the uselessness of the vote. What's the point of the vote? If the 1% control the whole electoral system, the vote has no value, right? So the Arab Spring, Occupy movement. Third movement, of course, the Tea Party, conservative movement, and incredibly effective movement, also media savvy, but very effective electorally in the sense of they got 50 members of Congress elected in 2010. They've shifted the Republican Party to the right. They forced the Democrats to the right, or at least to paralysis politically. So a very effective movement. Now, what's worth asking is, why is it that the first two, the progressive, again, just to complete the story, the Arab Spring culminates, I thought, just recently in Egypt with the election of the Muslim Brotherhood. Occupy will culminate with the election of Mitt Romney or the election of a even weaker Barack Obama. Meanwhile, the Tea Party, the outcome is much more power and to shape they've massively shaped the discourse and policies of the U.S. Right? So why is it that the first two progressive movements lead to these outcomes that don't have much electoral impact. They have cultural impact, and that's nice, but not so much if you're poor. Right? But it's nice for us. It is important. We want, we want to see hope, and so that is important, and we want to feel that there's out there of progressives. But like I said, not so important if you're poor. Maybe much less important. Meanwhile, the Tea Party does push through their agenda. So what's the difference? And the difference is the first two don't engage electorally. The Arab Spring, fantastic movement, but not a lot of time put into organizing an alternative political party for people to vote for. So the options people vote with the options they're left with. And of course, the Muslim Brotherhood gets elected. Occupy, same thing. There is no political alternative. It's not that they have to support the Democratic Party. Support the Green Party. Create a new party. Fantastic. But you have to engage with the electoral system because that's where power is located. That's where huge resources are located. You have to engage it. You don't leave it. If you leave that space open, it's occupied by the right. That's what happens. So that's why you have to take that space. All right. So now often when we think about, well, why is it that the left movements, while they garner so much media attention, are unsuccessful, but the right-wing movement is successful? The automatic reaction is, well, they're better funded than us. But activists throughout history have not been, progressive activists have never been as well funded as conservative activists. What we had was we had the majority's interests on our side. So we had a message that appealed to the majority. We had, and we also had thoughtful organizing. If we're well organized, we can be hugely successful. But we're not going to be successful if we don't engage with electoral politics. Now, I was really happy to hear Jeff and Francis say they're committed to being open, at least, to electoral politics. But if you walk through the Occupy ranks, so for example, this year I've been teaching in Toronto, and 2 blocks, I teach at this community college, at George Brown College. 2 blocks, and interestingly, by the way, it serves the bottom 1% of the student body in Canada. It's a very interesting college to work at. Just 2 blocks away, we had the Occupy encampment, which lasted for about a month. Every day I walked through, and I would talk to the Occupy activists. Almost no engagement with my students from the Occupy activists. Vast majority, middle-class, white students. And when you talk to them about electoral politics, they're not at all interested. So what's the impact of this? My students don't take it seriously. And ultimately, after about 6 weeks, the public doesn't take it seriously. We take it seriously because we write about it and think a lot about it. But maybe that's not enough, right? Okay, so now I don't want it to be all like kind of doom and gloom. On the other side, we do have Latin America, which has done incredible things. But for some reason, we don't really engage with those incredible things they've accomplished over the last 14 years. Since 1998, we've had leftist governments. Chavez was elected in 1998. Since then, we've had a number of leftist governments elected. It's amazing the things they've achieved. So let me give you a very simple example. Chavez comes into power in 1998. He has a 55% poverty rate in the country. 55%, a country of 30 million people. Now, today, there's a 26% poverty rate in Venezuela. He's cut poverty in half. 7 million people out of poverty. That done despite the incredible attacks of the opposition, incredible attacks of the US, etc. That's an achievement. That's a great achievement. That's helping people. If you don't like Chavez, go to a little more to the center. Brazil, Lula. 20 million people out of poverty in 8 years. That has impact. That is significant. And I think we should keep focused. We shouldn't forget these concrete empirical indicators of success. These things are very important to people. I think someone brought up the point of, well, okay, politics can't transform the system, but it can make people's lives better. Tell a person, in Brazil, in Venezuela, they've given hundreds of thousands of people free eye operations, poor people who never had access to a doctor and can now see. Tell them that electoral politics, well, it can improve your life, but it doesn't transform the world. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds completely crazy from their point of view. Their whole life has been transformed by this. So electoral politics are important. We should engage with electoral politics. Of course, we're all cynical about the mainstream political parties. Create other parties. That's what we have to do. But if we don't do that, now the problem is, if we don't do this, we end up in the situation we are in now. Muslim Brotherhood, Mitt Romney, us sitting in this room, endlessly writing and discussing this stuff. So anyways, that's it. I'll stop there. And I don't want to offend anyone, but I probably offended half of you. But in any case, that's my position on this.
Great.
All right.
Thank you. So I'm maybe going to exploit my position as the chair to ask a question of all of the panelists. We'll just get a quick response from all of you,
Sure.
I think maybe just to sharpen people's perspectives and the disagreements, perhaps latent, bring them out a little more, and also make things a little bit more concrete. So, you can go to any order you want. So you are now the grand advisor to Occupy Wall Street. What should Occupy Wall Street? What are the next steps for Occupy Wall Street? Both in a general sense, you can answer it generally however you want, and specifically with regard to the presidential election.
You can go in sequence.
Whatever you want.
Yeah, let's go and see.
Okay.
Okay. Obviously, it presumes that we know what Occupy Wall Street is and what it's capable of doing, right? In other words, what's the there over there when we talk about Occupy Wall Street? What's the entity, what's the agency that can make change happen within these structures? I would say the following things. The Occupy movement was incredibly effective in bringing the conversation back to inequality, and it reshaped the conversation nationally, and it did so in as effective a way as the Tea Party brought the deficit and that nonsense back onto the political stage, right? So I think that to the extent that people in the Occupy movement focus on the conversation that they've begun with the American people, they will create opportunities for other political actors, right? And they can that way pull the whole political spectrum to the left and to their conversation. I don't think Occupy Wall Street can intervene at this point in the election directly. I don't think they have the logistical and sort of political infrastructure to do that. But they have an enormous amount of social capital, really creative people who can help change the conversation politically with other aspects of the middle class. And this could be a very long conversation, but what was interesting about Occupy Wall Street and the Occupy movement in general is that for the first time, the white middle classes began to see themselves as the subjects of oppression and exploitation. And they were able to...
Can I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
Why don't we let everyone answer first, and then we'll have time for questions. It's okay. I mean, disagreement is great.
I'm not disagreeing. I mean, it's just that, is it a forum or am I going to... I came because I was very much interested in what everybody defines Occupy as. And so far, I've been paying attention to it for a long time. You're a big group. So what? So you stand for progressive ideals. Great, so do I. I've been a progressive all my life, been a Democrat all my life, but I won't go to Democratic meetings anymore. But I vote. This is the only point that I've never heard Occupy talk about, is to mobilize to vote. You said don't get dragged into an election campaign. You folks can do this all year, but in November there's going to be an election. And you don't want to be engaged. You don't want to be drawn into a campaign. Then what are you doing? You're just talking about, you're just talking,
okay.
talking, so you feel good. But I don't feel good watching you waste your time talking. We all agree. I agree on every single progressive notion that you have. So what?
Okay, so I'd like to address, can I address the point then?
I'm not going to
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so look, I think that to the extent that there are political actors that want to respond to Occupy's message, right, we're all going to be better off. To the extent that we can get that message out there, people in the political system can react to it and take advantage of the fact that we're out there mobilizing the public doesn't mean that we have
Are
to
you
be.
mobilizing the public?
Suren is not speaking for Occupy. No one on this panel is speaking for Occupy. We are having a conversation about the relationship of Occupy and other social movements to electoral politics, which is a question I think all of our speakers have tried to engage with some thought and some care. And so and did so in a more generalized way. And my question to all of you was just an attempt to get it a little more specific, to see if we could be a little more concrete. But I think it'd be great if we could give everyone a chance just to answer that really briefly, and then we can open it up to a larger
I know I've
discussion.
been speaking for a while, but just to make this point, to close out the point really quickly, I think social movements can impact the political process. I think that we can shape the debate, mobilize people, and that there are other forces better equipped, they may even overlap with us in terms of personnel, to get out the vote and do those kinds of things. The trade union movement is fantastically equipped to do that kind of thing, right? What do we want to do? What can we do? With our resources, the way we're constituted right now, we can shape the conversation and create political realities that way. Is that mutually exclusive with getting out the vote and doing other kinds of things? No, I don't think so. I think, in fact, quite the opposite. It facilitates the getting out of the vote to the extent that we are able to excite the public because there are politicians and other actors responding to the message of inequality. One thing that's happening, for example, right now, and Cole Harrison's in the room, right? In Massachusetts, nearly 1 million voters will get to vote on a budget for all initiative in the state of Massachusetts, right? And I think that those kinds of referenda provide an opportunity for social movements to go out in a nonpartisan way and pull out the public to vote for the kinds of values that we represent. And so I think there are all sorts of opportunities. We can make these things mutually exclusive, we can counterpose them, or we can find out ways in which these energies can be made synergistic.
Synergistic
So-
for what end?
Hang on. Let's let everyone answer the question.
They don't make sense. You can stop me if you want.
I am trying to stop you, actually.
So,
Thanks.
so for example, I was going to talk about something else, but you know, I said that I don't want to get dragged into a political campaign, but I support others that do. I've participated in political campaigns. I have reasons why I find other kinds of organizing more interesting for me. And it depends on the campaign and it depends on the moment. Perhaps Elizabeth Warren excites me so much that I want to participate in her campaign. Maybe, I don't know. One thing I'd like to do, though, is we could organize a direct action when Mitt Romney's in town and sort of show that he's the 1% and get a lot of, you know, sort of visibility around that and keep that discourse going. So, in what ways, as a participant in Occupy, if what we enjoy doing and are good at are sort of is organizing mass direct actions, can we do that in the context of the electoral campaign to move forward a set of ideas that benefit some candidates rather than others? I'd like to see Barack Obama win, for example. That doesn't mean I'm going to go work on Barack Obama's campaign, but I'd like to organize things that make him more likely to win than Mitt Romney.
Why?
So that's the kind of thing. Why?
Yeah.
Because I think materially, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people will see their lives improved if Barack Obama is president and not Mitt Romney. I think if Mitt Romney is elected, you're going to see a much greater turn to austerity. You'll see austerity in the Obama campaign administration as well, and that's a shame. I'd like to change that, but I think it's going to be much worse with Mitt Romney. I think you're going to, you know, if there's a Supreme Court justice that has to be replaced, you're going to have people affected. You know, if you're talking about balancing the budget versus raising taxes on the 1% and using that money to redistribute resources, I don't think there's any, if you share certain progressive values, there's not much empirical doubt, I don't want to overstate the case, that you're better off if Barack Obama's president. It doesn't mean that you know, Barack Obama's going to initiate radical transformation. That's what I was talking about before. I don't think Lula sort of radically transformed the system, but he did make people's lives immeasurably better. Right? That's a tension that I see. So just briefly on the Tea Party. I don't think the Tea Party is even the same kind of entity as Occupy. I think there's multiple Tea Parties, but I think we can talk about it as two Tea Parties. There's the grassroots decentralized Tea Party that caught everybody's attention when it first happened, and that was very much like Occupy. You actually saw lots of Tea Party people who were into the Tea Party hang around the Occupy camps. But then you have the real organized Republican apparatchiks who are really the force behind the electoral Tea Party. right? The Tea Party candidates that are getting elected, it's not because of the grassroots decentralized Tea Party. It's because you have Republicans, Dick Armey and the like, who have been organizing for years, building institutions, have lots of money. So that's the equivalent. If the left is going to engage politically, electorally, that's the kind of institution building that needs to happen. I don't think Occupy is about that or is equipped to do that personally, but that doesn't mean I'd like to see it happen. But I think I don't think we can compare the Tea Party and Occupy because of that. So I'd like to see Occupy during the electoral cycle engage in lots of really interesting, militant, and creative direct actions that show that certain candidates represent the 1%, and that show that other candidates would, you know, if they were elected, would put us in better standing. That would actually improve lots of people's lives. And some people, I think, can go and join campaigns if they want. I won't, but I think we can work together.
If I were the grand advisor of Occupy Wall Street, what would I do? I think I would speak louder. I think one of the first things I would do, I would say more baldly what Suren said much more politely, which is that Occupy Wall Street is in some ways a shadow of its former self right now. And that our first job, if we were to do anything for the elections, would be to reform and to get people involved and engaged once again, like we were this past fall. And to do that, we need something to form around. Like Jeff said, I think one of the great strengths of Occupy is these mass direct actions. And I'd want to see engagement in mass direct actions that call into question the role of the role of voting, the role of electoral politics itself. I've heard some Occupy Boston people I know, I've heard the talk of writing in no one on ballots, for instance. But I'd love to see some engagement with perhaps advancing a third party. I'd love to see engagement with the question of the cancerous influence of money in politics. And I think that we could do some really cool demonstrations on these kinds of subjects. I'd also love to see questions of whether voting and representative democracy are really a great way of making decisions. And one of the things Occupy did was a very public exploration of a quasi-consensus model. And that could be something that we could perhaps bring forward a little bit more publicly. The other thing is that I'd like to see these creative minds that Suren spoke of, these wonderful creative people that drew me to Occupy in the first place, because this is where a concentration of fantastically creative people were. I'd love to see work laterally, around but not on the elections themselves. I want to see experiments in cooperation. I want to see experiments in education in particular. What you said about your students is something that I see with my students. And for good or for ill, our students always notice when elections happen. And I think that that can be a wonderful opportunity to engage in some public education, and that we can use some of the minds in Occupy for these kinds of education, for these kinds of innovation in business, for these kinds of innovation in the arts and in media that can exist around but not of the elections themselves. So that's what I would do if I were the grand advisor of Occupy Wall Street.
If I was the grand advisor to Occupy Wall Street, I guess the first thing I would say is we have advisors. First of all. Second of all, I guess I'm a little uncomfortable with the conversation just because of what I understand of Occupy as opposed to Occupy Wall Street. And Occupy is everywhere. It's in tiny little towns in Indiana. It's in New York City. It's in Little Wise in Nebraska. Occupy is everywhere. So I guess in a lot of ways, the old Occupy me who hasn't broken out of that little shell yet says, well, what does this mean? What does Occupy do in the new election? And then there's the new me that says, fuck it, get out the vote. I don't care who you vote for, just get out the vote. So if I was the grand advisor, I would start setting up registration tables absolutely everywhere.
and educating everyone on what is happening with our government and what your vote means in every sense. Just educating our public and our Occupy people and everyone else out there, because if they are in little towns in Indiana and they're in little towns all over this country, we can make a difference. And I really do think we can politically make a difference. But we got to get people to get out there and actually vote. I don't want to tell them how to vote, but I want to give them the education and put the table out there that says, just fill this out and we will even mail it for you.
Okay, so I would say three things. One, make inequality, and they're repeating some of the things people said, make inequality the key electoral issue. Right now it seems to me the key electoral issue is much more around the deficit, austerity, and unemployment. But I would figure out a way to make inequality the key electoral issue, because while it attracted lots of media discussion in the fall, that discussion hasn't taken place in terms of the discourse politicians are engaged with right now. So one, make inequality the key electoral issue. Two, do everything you can to make sure Mitt Romney does not get elected, because if anyone is going to make inequality worse, it will be him. That's so obvious. And to not realize that, to actually think that somehow the Democrats and Republicans are just two wings of the same bird is really simplistic. You will massively change people's lives by not letting Mitt Romney get elected. So that means, I do think Occupy people should go volunteer with those trade union activists that Suren was pointing out, and learn to help people mobilize the vote. That's a good skill to learn, and learn to work with activists who have a different agenda from your own. I think that's a good thing. So third, I would say educate themselves, Occupy activists, on how inequality has historically been reduced. Because there seems to be a lack of understanding of how it's actually happened. As if we're just a new movement or the first movement to bring this up. No, it has been reduced in the past, and there have been strategies that have been effective. So educate themselves on those strategies. So those would be my three things. Oh, and a fourth thing, I would support this thing that someone just passed around. Chris Stur just passed around. This looks really great.
I am a person who has been involved in the Occupy movement. I love the Occupy movement. And I'm one of the few people in the Occupy movement who really does think the Occupy movement really ought to get engaged in electoral politics, but I also don't think it will. I do hope that some people who are engaged in the Occupy movement now, at some point in the future, will see the light and become political activists. In a sense that can actually, because basically I agree with everything the gentleman on the end, I've forgotten your name, I'm sorry, almost everything that you said. I think that, I also agree with a lot of what Suren said, but more what Thomas said. I think that you do have to engage in some kind of real world power struggle if you want to change the real world. And it's not okay to say, well, it's just not our role, that's somebody else's role, because it's not us. But I do disagree with one thing you said, which is the thing about starting a third party for purely technical reasons. I think in the American system, that's A, just a ticket to failure, and B, it's unnecessary. And I also will point out that the Tea Party, who you point out was more successful electorally, did not start a new party. They just took over local chapters of the Republican Party. We could do the same thing with the Democratic Party. Democratic Party is wide open. We could go in and organize a certain district, replace all the people who were the Democratic Party activists in that district with our own people, which is what the Tea Party often did. Find a really radical Occupy candidate and elect the sucker. Okay? And do that with a bunch of them. And one of the problems is when progressives elect what we call progressives, they're usually wishy-washy liberals who talk a good talk, but they won't stand up to the leadership. They won't risk getting marginalized in the legislature because they came out strongly for raising taxes on the rich, for example. We need people who say, to hell with the leadership, I don't care if you stick me in the broom closet and don't put me on any committees, I think we should raise taxes on the rich, and they should do it publicly, they should do it in the press, and they should make us think about it, and they should stand at our demonstrations and say that in front of other people. Until we start electing people like that, we won't make a difference. We won't have radical change, and I think we need to do that. But I absolutely think we need to engage in electoral politics, as well as movement politics, as well as street heat. We need both. We need to walk on all the legs that we've been given.
I think we should engage in electoral politics, I always have. But I think you're all cowards. If you really want to win, you got to be not afraid to lose. Romney, yeah, he'll do terrible things. Obama won't improve anybody's life. The only way to improve people's life is when they get engaged to improve it themselves. We cannot improve it for them. When they get engaged and throw off the mantle of impression, at least in the mind, that's the only way we're going to have any impact at all. And you got to be willing to lose. You got to abandon Obama. Sure, we could take over the Democratic Party. I'd be fine with that. But we got to abandon Obama. There is no difference. We have been given this great health care program that now requires us to give our taxes to private corporations, and they can play with them as they see fit. That's the worst decision we could possibly have. But does it improve? Obama's going to improve people's lives? I doubt it. Corporations are just going to find a new way to get around the rules. And until we, essentially in my book, although I do engage in a lot of protest is useless. What are they going to give you? The only way to do it is to do it yourself. Go out, start a cooperative, start a dozen cooperatives. Quit buying from Walmart, quit watching media, mainstream media, give your money elsewhere. You know, I just think it's time to quit worrying about what we're going to say to them and just do it ourselves. We don't need them. And we're proving it that we don't need them. So, in my book, you know, forget protesting the current system, take on the future and build it yourself.
I remember the election of 1972, sitting there with my buddies throwing eggs at the TV set because Richard Nixon had just been re-elected president. I thought that, you know, he hadn't accomplished a goddamn thing, you know? It was just, look, this guy gets elected, you know? I mean, what the hell's going on here? Of course, then I read, you know, later on in life that actually Nixon was in power when some of the most fundamental changes were going on. And really, that is what happened. The people that did it back then, most of them didn't think they accomplished anything. I think that we're going to see in the period we're living now that a lot has been accomplished that we're just not aware of. We should just think about that a little bit. That, you know, we are living through a period that's somewhat volatile. And you know, as far as when I look at the remarks here, I mean, I hope Suren's initial remarks were taped, you know, because I'd like to play them back to a lot of people. You know, the Republicans won the election, but you know, women won abortion rights. The war was ended. I mean, I could go, you know, affirmative action, the Clean Air Act. You know, all kinds of things happened then. And I tend to agree with those that say that when you move the base, the rest of society, you know, the superstructure gets dragged along with it. And I believe Suren used that formulation. And you're seeing it in Europe as well. And, you know, co-op movements like the gentleman just explained are part of that. Occupy is part of it. You know, I think we're going to see other things just burst onto the scene again. The 60s wasn't just the free speech movement in Berkeley, okay? All these other things, you know, erupted throughout the 60s and into the early 70s. And, you know, you're going to see variations of what we saw with Occupy. That's my opinion. A lot of folks didn't notice when 2.5 million people launched the first general strike since World War II. This happened on April, May of 2006. And a lot of people, you know, they don't think of that as something historic. You know, you're going to read, kids are going to, you know, go to high school and read about that someday. You know, there was a general strike. And that's why Obama, the base shifted somewhat, and so now, this piddly little reform, squirts out, and they're not going to prosecute these young people who want to be, have a road to citizenship. But again, I believe, whether it's Romney or Obama, the superstructure is going to reflect, deep shifts that are going on in the base, and we have to be cognizant of that.
Since there seems to be a general, correct me if this is wrong, there seems to be a more positive connection or association with electoral politics than I perhaps expected from this panel. Can I push the conversation a little bit? And I'll ask it from a very personal place, which is the following. So I have my own skepticism about the entreaty to just get out and vote. I'm deeply skeptical that voting changes anything, or that it's a meaningful form of political participation. And so I wonder if folks who are interested in supporting voter drive initiatives, if they want to talk more about why that's a good thing. And then perhaps related to that is I feel enormous despair facing this presidential election, and I'm particularly interested in the rhetoric of improving people's lives. My question would be whose lives? Whose lives get improved if we elect Obama, and whose lives wouldn't get improved? I understand that we could potentially, we might need an economist station might have to help me out. So I understand maybe domestically we could say Obama might improve some people's lives more than Romney would in terms of austerity measures. But given that he, is such a warmonger and has been worse than Bush, whose lives would be improved by an Obama second term and whose lives would be snuffed out? And should that be a factor in our thinking about electoral politics?
30 million people will have health insurance with Obama. Just because they're not us doesn't mean they're not important people. This is the kind of stuff, it drives me insane, these comments. Sorry. But it drives me crazy. It drives me crazy when people say stuff like this, because it's like, do you know what the experience of not having health insurance is? Or what about, for example, okay, I'm Canadian, we have universal health insurance. This has massive impacts on our poverty statistics in Canada compared to the US. People do not go into poverty for many reasons because they have universal health care. 30 million people were uninsured with the Obamacare thing, or the Romney care thing, whatever we want to call it. 30 million people now have insurance. That's a big deal. I live in a co-op. I lived in a co-op for 6 years while I was living here, and right now I'm staying in that co-op for 2 months. We have people at that co-op who are unemployed, but because of Massachusetts health care, they get access to free health care. They pay $15 each time they go in for a checkup. When it hits $500, they don't have to pay anymore. And these are people who get pretty important things. They're older people. They're in their 50s and 60s. The person will get a colonoscopy for $15. I don't know, that seems pretty good if there's a risk of someone getting colorectal cancer. Right? Come on, people's lives are massively changed. This is a big difference. Romney has said that if he gets into power, he'll do whatever he can to either weaken that law or eliminate it. Doesn't that seem to be an important thing? 30 million Americans having health insurance?
Can I add to that? Because I agree with you, Thomas, and I think that a lot of times people talk theoretically and are not in the streets in terms of, if I may use that word, and don't know people who will be affected that way. But in addition, I don't think that a revolution is going to be made by people who are looking for work, who are trying to put food on the table.
Right.
People who will make the revolution or have the health care and have enough food, etc., that then we can really reach them in terms of education and say how fucked up things have been, etc. But so I think that in the long range, that also helps. The more people that we can get those kinds of basic food stamps and all that stuff that is Romney will destroy, all of those teeny little programs, that can help us have a group of people to get them out to vote. Who doesn't vote, for example? And if they voted, we could then run some really good candidates. All right, so that I just wanted to add that the long range piece, it's not just short range.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are helpful ways to talk about this and unhelpful ways. And one way that I find unhelpful is to make emotional pleadings, like, do you understand the situation of someone without health care, or someone who under Romney care, is too poor to afford really good quality coverage, but doesn't quite qualify for the free coverage that is provided.